One of the greatest products out there for the retro gaming enthusiast are these flash cards. They basically allow us to store a console's entire library onto a tiny SD card that we can then play on a console. While these can be a great investment for the avid retro gamer, they can be a bit pricey. But the folks over at Easy Flash just released a new Game Boy Advance flash card that seems to balance features and price, coming in at just half the cost of the next cheapest option. Given what it can do, is it worth the savings? Well, let's find out. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Tito and welcome to Macho Nacho Productions. I wanted to start the video off first by apologizing for the lack of videos lately, but I am working on some really exciting projects that I really can't wait to share with you. So today I actually have a pretty simple topic. We're basically going to be taking a look at this all-new flash card from the folks over at Easy Flash. It's called the Air, but it's definitely not light on features. This one here was kindly sent over from the folks over at Retro Game Repair Shop, so if after watching the video you're interested in picking one of these up, definitely check out the link down below in the video description, and be sure to use the coupon code TITO at checkout to save an additional 10%. Now, we all use flashcards, as they're a great way to store all of our favorite titles in one place, and also play some of those games that are getting a little out of hand in terms of price. Now, just a bit of background, this here is my first Easy Flash, the Omega, which I honestly love as it came with this extra shell that allows you to install it into a DS Lite and have it sit flush instead of stick out like a regular Game Boy Advance cartridge would. This makes it perfect for those Game Boy macro builds or just keeping it inserted in your DS Lite. Sadly, I don't think they sell these anymore. Then there's the Easy Flash Definitive Edition, which is currently my daily driver and is sort of at the top of the line for Easy Flash devices on the Game Boy Advance. We'll compare the all-new Air to these Omega variants, since these are the only flash cards I have for the GBA. There is of course the Crix EverDrive carts, which are also amazing, but I unfortunately don't have one for comparison. Anyway, before we dive into the review, let's first do a really quick unboxing, and I'll also show you how to set it up. And here's the box, nothing too special, and inside is just the card itself, no manual or anything else, and that's perfectly fine. Now, to set this up, you will obviously need an SD card, preferably one that isn't too big. I just happen to have this 64GB one lying around, which is honestly overkill, but we'll make it work. Go ahead and insert the card into your computer and then format it. If it's 32GB and under, you'll need to use the FAT32 format. And if it's above 32GB, you'll need to use exFAT. Since mine is above 32GB, I'm going to go ahead and format it in exFAT. Next, we're going to have to go ahead and navigate over to the Easy Flash website, which I have linked down below, and then go to the download section. And then from there, go ahead and select Air. Now, this here is optional, but you can also download the cover art as well as the cheat codes. But the thing you'll definitely want is the latest kernel, which is 1.02. This will give you the latest firmware. I already went ahead and downloaded these to my desktop, so next all you need to do is extract the contents of these files onto your SD card. Both the images and the cheat codes will take a bit of time to extract, so I'm just going to go ahead and fast forward through it. And once that's done, we can go ahead and copy in all of our games. Okay, next what we need to do is take our flash card with all of our files and games and insert it into the Easy Flash Air, and before turning the console on, go ahead and press the right trigger and then power on the system. The kernel should update the firmware on the Air to the latest version, and once it's done, we can now start playing our games. Alright, so now that we're all set up, let's go ahead and take a look at the features. Okay, so this Game Boy Advance here has my Easy Flash Omega Definitive Edition card installed, and this one over here has the Air. Typically on flash cards like the Definitive Edition, you would just need to select the game you want to play, and then click the Clean Boot option, and the game will pretty much start instantly. However, on the Air, when you select a game, you'll notice that we do not have the Clean Boot option. We basically have an option called Write to NOR Clean. Essentially, what this does is it writes the game ROM to the NOR flash memory. This process of writing to the NOR flash can actually take some time depending on the size of the game. For example, a larger title like one of the Pokemon games can easily take over a minute. But once the ROM is written to the NOR flash, playing the game is much quicker, very much like a regular flash card. So here's an example. These are all games that I have written to the NOR flash. All I have to do is select it and then press Direct Boot, and the game loads pretty much immediately. Now, because the Air does rely on the NOR flash to boot games, it does come with a much higher capacity. On the Omega Definitive Edition cart, there's 50MB of NOR flash memory versus 100MB on the Air, so basically double. And since Game Boy Advance games typically run between 8 megabytes and 32 megabytes, you should be able to store anywhere between 3 and 12 games on the NOR flash on the Air, depending on the size of the games. Of course, you can delete games from the NOR flash and load different ones from the SD card if you run out of space, or you can format the entire NOR flash to have a clean slate. So essentially, if you're playing a few games pretty often and don't need to constantly play different titles on your Game Boy Advance, this should work just fine. But if you're the type to constantly be changing the games you're playing, then this may not be the cart for you. Anyway, there are other features that are on the Omega Definitive Edition that are also on the Air as well, such as the real-time clock support as well as rumble. Those are both here. However, there is another difference between these two carts, and that's how they save your games. In the Definitive Edition, it uses a FRAM chip, while on the Air, it uses an SRAM chip. Now, to the user, this makes no difference, as games can be saved without any issue. Basically, the SRAM requires a battery to retain the save data on the chip. If the battery dies, so does your save data. This is the same method used on many of the original Game Boy cartridges. The FRAM chip, on the other hand, does not require a battery, so your save data can in theory last pretty much forever. However, both the Definitive Edition cart and the Air allow you to back up your saves to the SD card with this option here. If selected, it will do an automatic backup every time you turn the console on. Or you can also set it to ask you each time you power on the console if you want to perform that backup. Either way you set it up, having an SRAM or FRAM chip for saves shouldn't be much of an issue, but it is a difference. And speaking of save data, the Air does not support save states like the Definitive Edition does. This option is part of the add-on setting in the Definitive Edition. But as you can see here, there is just a reset and cheat option in the Air, no save states. Another feature that I want to go over is Mode B, which is activated by this tiny switch here. Just note you will need something very narrow in order to move that switch. And again, both the Definitive Edition and the Air have Mode B. If you select the Link option, it basically allows the cart to act like an original Nintendo cart. What I mean, when you turn the console on, the flash cart will boot directly into the first game that is stored in the NOR flash, and in this case, it's Metroid Zero Mission. Essentially, this is designed for games like Pokemon, which allow you to transfer your Pokemon between your Game Boy Advance Pokemon game and your DS Pokemon game. I've actually never used this functionality myself, but it is a feature in both of these flash carts. Now, something that I absolutely love about all the Omega flash carts is their support for Game Boy Color, and NES games, and thankfully that is carried over into the Air as well. This is great since both the DS as well as the Micro are not backwards compatible with Game Boy Color, or let alone NES games. It basically allows you to enjoy games from 2 additional platforms in this single cart, so I'm glad that they kept this functionality in the Air. And the last notable feature is Rumble support, which is for DS games that use this function. Again, this is present in both flash carts. Alright, so those are the main features of the Air. But now let's get into the pros and cons. Starting with the pros, I think the biggest one by far is the price. At $40, it's just half the cost of the $80 Definitive Edition, and you get many of the key features of that higher end flash cart. And the savings are much greater when you compare it to the EverDrive. Those tend to cost in the neighborhood of $120, so there's some pretty good value there. The Easy Flash Air will allow you to store and play every single Game Boy Advance game, so as a flash cart, it does its job and it does it pretty well. But if we dive just a bit deeper, there are a few inconveniences, which brings us to the cons. So obviously the Air has a few features removed, such as save states, which I can see some people not liking, but also RAM expansion, which at least for me isn't that big of a deal breaker. I think the issue that most people will have will be the need to load games to the NOR flash first before you're able to play them. Now again, to be clear, the games loaded to the NOR flash will remain on the NOR flash until you delete it. So once it's there, you can load your games easily anytime you use the Air. So if you are comfortable with loading just a few of your most played titles into the NOR flash and only occasionally changing the games that you want to play, I think the Air can be an extremely compelling option. Now, I do have to say that one issue I did run into has to do with the real-time clock, which seems to not work in Mode B, at least for the time being. When playing a game that uses the RTC functionality, I get an error saying that the battery has run dry. However, when not in Mode B, this doesn't appear to be an issue, and the real-time clock functionality works just fine. This is a problem that is not present in the Definitive Edition, as it appears to work just fine in Mode B. So I'm hoping that the folks over at Easy Flash will be able to fix this issue soon with a firmware update. Now, as for me, what do I think about the Air? Well, like I said, I do have the Definitive Edition here, which is my daily driver. But I do think there is a place for the Air for those that maybe want to save a few bucks and don't plan on switching a ton of different games very often. If you only play a handful of titles at a time, then perhaps the Air may be a good fit for you too. Well folks, there you have it. A compelling, competitively priced flash cart for the Game Boy Advance. What do you all think? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Now if you enjoyed this video, I really think you'll like this one here, so check it out. And as always, thank you all so much for tuning in today, and I'll catch you again next time.